How many planes made it back? What? Wait, that's only half. Only half the planes made it back? Huh? Even the Bulgarian Air Force took out a few? Wow, we sure don't hear about them that often. Okay, bye. August 6, 1943. Cars run on oil and gasoline. Tanks too. Trucks too, as well as motorcycles and self-propelled guns, planes, and whatnot. If your enemy uses a lot of those in war against you, you may just try to take it out at the source.
Here's a word from our sponsors.
Smash the tyrants. Fight for democracy. Join the Time Ghost Army. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Benito Mussolini was ousted as Italian leader amid great dissatisfaction among Italians with how the war was going. They lost North Africa in May, and now it looks like Sicily will soon also be lost. In the USSR, Operation Kutuzov forced the Germans to retreat in the center, though as the week ended, it was the Germans who attacked further south. In New Georgia, the Americans were fighting hard to reach Munda, and from the skies, the firebombing of Hamburg killed tens of thousands of civilians. There is more news from the skies this week. The skies over Romania. On August 1st, Operation Tidal Wave is launched, the Allied bombing of the Ploiești oil fields. The refineries here provide the Axis with some 30% of their oil. There was an attack already last June here with 13 B-24s, with the result that Luftwaffe General Alfred Gerstenberg had German and Romanian forces build one of the heaviest air defense networks on the continent, featuring several hundred 88 guns and Flak 38 cannons in 78 batteries hidden in haystacks, train cars, and buildings. These are divided up between the German 5th Flak Division and the Romanian 4th AA Brigade, though half of the German division is Romanians. When you add in that the Axis have many dozens of fighter planes within easy range of Ploiești, it becomes one of the best defended targets in Europe, behind only Berlin, the Ruhr, and possibly Vienna. The U.S. 9th Air Force, backed by 3 bomb groups from the 8th, carries out the mission, and it is planned by Colonel Jacob Smart. He is not aware that the defenses have been beefed up so much since the last raid, so they have planned to attack by day and to fly low to avoid radar. 177 of 178 B-24 Liberator planes carrying 1,758 total crew take off in the morning safely from near Benghazi. They maintain total radio silence, with the result that they cannot maintain group cohesion and they get strung out, some following the wrong railway line and heading for Bucharest. Some planes even being shot down over Bulgaria by the Bulgarian Air Force, its first kills of the war. As it turns out, only 88 planes, pretty much half, actually return to Libya. Others land on Cyprus, others land in neutral Turkey and are interned. Some others are ditched in the Mediterranean. 310 crew are killed or missing, 108 captured by the Axis, 78 interned in Turkey. 53 liberators are shot down, and 55 more take damage. In exchange for that, they damage some of the refineries, though others are untouched. The damage is not only repaired within a few weeks, the output of the refineries, once it is, will be greater than it is before the raid, since many refineries have been operating at below max capacity. The mission is a complete failure, and a very costly one at that. The Americans are making ground attacks this week in Europe as well, in Sicily. Now, the Americans are attacking towards Troina, thinking it weakly defended, like the oil fields, I guess. But this is also not the case. So the fighting midweek is some of the bloodiest of the whole Sicily campaign. Hans-Valentin Hube, German 14th Panzer Corps commander, does not want to lose his force in any more such attritional battles, though. So he begins withdrawing from Troina and Catania, the 4th and the 5th. After spending nearly a week regrouping, the British and Canadians are themselves on the move again July 31st towards Regalbuto and Centuripe, which they take on the 2nd. On the 4th, the British attack Catania, taking it the 5th. The Americans take Troina today the 6th, and the British attack Adrano. Also today, some German and Italian leaders meet at Verona. Foreign Ministers von Ribbentrop and Guariglia, and Chiefs of Staff Keitel and Ambrosio. The Italians try to assure the Germans that they are not negotiating with the Allies. This is not true. In fact, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and US President Franklin Roosevelt spoke last week on the 29th about armistice negotiations and secret contacts with Italy that had already been made. They also talked about British POWs in Italy and how to prevent them being transferred elsewhere. German intelligence intercepted this call, though, and Adolf Hitler was made aware of it. Then, on the 30th, he got a report from the German security chief in Zagreb that Mario Rota, Italian Army Chief of Staff, told a senior Croat general that Badoglio's assurances are designed merely to gain time for the conclusion of negotiations with the enemy. So German troops begin arriving to take over Italy's defenses. The Italians begin moving troops to protect Rome and the main naval base at La Spezia, and to contain the Germans to the north of the country if it ever comes to that. The Americans are also attacking far to the east in the Solomon Islands. They renew attacks towards Munda I, and it's obvious that the enemy has withdrawn, so the advance becomes more of a pursuit. The Japanese will not reinforce here anymore and will concentrate on Kolombangara Island. They managed to move some troops there from New Georgia and will send the remaining forces on New Georgia to Banga Island. On the 4th and 5th, the Americans take Munda and the airfield. It has been a bloody fight, and the Japanese now have an equally strong defensive system on Kolombangara with 10,000 men defending the airstrip there, which is more than there were at Munda. Bull Halsey's part of Operation Cartwheel, the big overall Allied operation here, is falling way behind schedule. But attacking Kolombangara will likely only make that worse. So, well, at Chester Nimitz's suggestion, Halsey decides to do what they did in the Aleutians and just jump past the enemy's strong point to isolate and hopefully even starve it. The next big island past Kolombangara is Vella La Vella. Recon says there are only maybe 250 people there, and it could house at least one airstrip. So the plan is to hit that next, bypassing Kolombangara completely. There is also a naval battle in the area this week, the night of the 6th, the Battle of Vela Gulf. 6 US destroyers versus 4 Japanese destroyers transporting men to Kolombangara. 3 Japanese destroyers and the soldiers jamming their narrow decks were sent to the bottom in the first action fought by American destroyers free to maneuver in a night action, unencumbered by the need to cover light cruisers. The engagement proved that given the chance, their captains had every bit as much elan in a night battle as the well-practiced Japanese crews. This was also the first time in the Solomons that the Americans used torpedoes as the primary offensive weapons. Here's an interesting story from the fighting around there this week. On the 1st, Japanese planes bombed the American PT base at Rendova Island, hoping to deter activity against a destroyer transport mission. But 15 PT boats set out that night anyhow, though they fail against the destroyers. One of the PT boats, PT-109, is rammed by a Japanese destroyer and split in two. The explosion is such that the rest of the boats think their unfortunate boat destroyed, and they head back to Rendova. But the crew has survived, 11 of them, clinging to some timbers, and reach a small island. On the 2nd, one of them, the boat commander, swims out to sea, hoping to flag down any PT boats that might turn up. His name is John F. Kennedy. Now this does not work. There is no fresh water on Plum Pudding Island, Olasana Island, or Nauru Island either, the 3 islands within long swimming distance. Though on the 5th, Kennedy finds a drum of water and a canoe left by the Japanese on Nauru. 2 native coast watchers agree to take a message southward, which Kennedy scratches into a coconut shell, right? It reads, Nauru is island. Native knows posit. He can pilot. 11 alive. Needs small boat. The idea is that the message will reach one of the Australian coast watchers who work for Allied intelligence along the long and unguarded coasts of the island chains. These guys depend on the goodwill of the locals. This works, and a Lieutenant Evans, a coast watcher on an unoccupied island next to the Japanese-occupied island Vona Vona, gets the message. He replies, "Have just learned of your presence on Nauru Island and also that 2 natives have taken news to Rendova. I strongly advise you to return immediately to here in this canoe, and by the time you arrive here, I will be in radio communication with authorities at Rendova and we can finalize plans to collect the balance of your party." Well, this all works out early next week with the help of a local canoeist, Benjamin Kevu. Kennedy becomes a decorated war hero, and spoiler alert, when Kennedy is the president of the US 2 decades later, both Evans and Kevu are invited to the White House, and the coconut with its scratched message and Evans' reply will take pride of place among Kennedy's souvenirs and trophies. As for the war in the Atlantic, the British stepped up the pace of their offensive in the Bay of Biscay in June and sank 20 subs there of the 37 total lost by the Axis this month. American hunter-killer groups have had success near Gibraltar and the Azores, in large part thanks to the 3 escort carriers Bogue, Santee, and Cove. It is the Germans that have had more success in the South Atlantic, though, off the Brazilian and African coasts. In all theaters, the Allies lose 61 ships for 365,400 tons, 46 of those to subs. On the 31st, Churchill tells Roosevelt that in the past 90 days, they've sunk 85 German U-boats. Now, Churchill sets off from Clyde on the Queen Mary IV for the US and Canada. Churchill spent the greater part of the voyage drilling his military advisors in the tactics to be followed at the Quadrant Conference, which was to take place in Quebec. His aim was to persuade the Americans of the wisdom of attacking Italy as part of his soft underbelly Mediterranean strategy, which now extended to the Balkans. This, and the hope of making Norway an alternative to France, disturbed the British chiefs of staff. He also has Ord Wingate with him, who we last saw in Burma, and wants Wingate's long-range penetration strategy for Burma to replace the planned Anakim offensive to reopen the Burma Road and supply China overland again, together with a Far Eastern Torch, an amphibious operation against Sumatra and Malaya. This will likely not sit well with the Americans, who are dead set on a campaign to invade France, and would generally prefer attacking Burma at the expense of attacking Italy. Well, Churchill's first stop next week will be President Roosevelt's home for a private meeting. One long-range penetration strategy having hiccups this week is the Axis one that's been going on for the past 2 years in the Soviet Union. The night of the 31st, the Germans begin withdrawing to the Hagenstellung, east of Bryansk at the base of the Orel salient. However, Stavka has also reorganized by this week for a drive on Orel itself. Markey and Popov's Bryansk front has been beefed up for the task, and Pavel Rybalko's tank army is now part of Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front, who are to drive northwestward south of Orel. The 4th and 5th they get going, and Orel falls soon enough, and the Orel salient is rapidly deflated. Yet 2nd Panzer Army still manages to evacuate 20,000 wounded men and 53,000 tons of supplies. They also demolish bridges and any military infrastructure as they withdraw, and basically begin a scorched earth policy. Erich von Manstein's counterattacks further south that began late last week to reclaim their old positions continue this week. By the end of July, the SS Das Reich division has taken Stepanovka. The next couple of days see fierce fighting along the lines, even with a flash flood, and the Soviets are eventually forced to make a general retreat to the Mius River. Since the Germans hold the high ground west of the river, they rain down artillery on the men trying to cross and inflict heavy casualties. But despite losing here, this actually fits in with Soviet plans. The attack by the Red Army had served a purpose, dragging German reserves into a wearing battle in the south. The German counterattack on the Mius commenced less than 2 weeks after 2nd Panzer Corps was pulled out of the fighting in the Kursk salient, and much of that time had been spent redeploying from one location to another. The human fatigue, the wear and tear on equipment, and the loss of irreplaceable experienced personnel would all take a toll, and it was inevitable that a stage would come when they could no longer prevail as they had in the past. With its huge resources, the Red Army could afford to keep applying pressure on different parts of the front, confident that a breakthrough would come. The Soviets also still have their Izium bridgehead, and if Manstein was hoping it would take them weeks to recover from Kursk, he was mistaken, for Operation Rumyantsev begins this week. This is the main Soviet counterstroke, and it calls for a huge assault by Nikolai Vatutin's Voronezh and Ivan Konyev's steppe fronts to try to destroy 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf, liberate Belgorod and Kharkov, and reach the Black Sea. The German defenses were rudimentary at best. Although several defense belts existed, only the first belt was held in any strength. By the time Rumyantsev commenced, the Stavka had concentrated 980,588 men, 12,627 guns and mortars, and 2,439 tanks and self-propelled guns for the attack. The German defenders could muster barely 210,000 men and approximately 250 tanks and assault guns. Soviet force superiority in main attack sectors was even more pronounced. It begins with artillery at 5 a.m. August 3rd, and already by the afternoon, the Soviets have cleared the first belt of the German defenses. 5th Guards Army has advanced 14 kilometers. Just the first day, a 10-kilometer gap is opened between 4th Panzers and Army Detachment Kemp. Sure, not all of the attacks are successful, and there are serious holdups around Tomarovka, but advance the Soviets do, basically bypassing places like Tomarovka. Fighting on the outskirts of Belgorod begins the 4th. On the 5th, it is liberated. The liberation of Belgorod coincides with the recapture of Orel further north, and guns were fired in salute in Red Square in Moscow. It was the first such salute of the war. That source continues, however, by pointing out that Belgorod is very much a city in ruins. Before the war, it had a population of 43,000. That is now down to below 200. Tomarovka also finally falls. The Germans do manage to mostly withdraw from it, but they leave around 50 tanks behind when they do. Today, the 6th, the Soviets take Zolochev northwest of Kharkov, and attacks begin towards Kharkov from several points today. The Soviet Western Front also begins some actions this week. Well, today, actually. These are probing attacks. German commander Günther von Kluge knows that an offensive is coming, and on the 3rd, Soviet partisans begin blowing up railway tracks in the region, but no major attacks happen just yet. And here are some notes to end the week. On August 1st, Japan announces that Burma is independent and has declared war on Britain and the US. That same day, the Americans bombard Kiska Island from the sea, unaware that the Japanese have already left the building. On the 5th, the Swedish government says it will no longer allow German troops and war material to use the Swedish railways. There is also an incident with George Patton slapping one of his men, but that you can learn about on our day-by-day Instagram coverage of the war, which you can also find here under the Community tab. And the week ends with an Axis withdrawal in the USSR, Axis withdrawal from New Georgia, Axis withdrawal on Sicily, and a huge bombing offensive in Romania with big losses for the attackers. And Churchill sets off across the Atlantic, which is a whole lot safer than it was a few months ago with the Allies having the upper hand there. And they have control of the Mediterranean too now. And they seem to have the upper hand in aerial attacks away from the actual battle lines. And the distances they can fly now are pretty serious. I mean, it's roughly 1,500 kilometers as the crow flies from Benghazi to Ploiești. So to get back to base again is 3,000, and you're carrying a full bombing load for half of that. It's under 1,000 from London to Berlin. The Allies can by now basically bomb anywhere in Europe. And sure, the Romanian run was a disaster, but most of them aren't. Wuppertal, Hamburg, tens of thousands of casualties. The Soviets are attacking west, and the Allies crossing Sicily towards mainland Italy. At this point, you can see that while they're by no means defeated, the Axis forces in Europe are very much hemmed in, and their people at home are very much vulnerable. You, at home, have an army you can call your own too, the Time Ghost Army. That is what keeps my coverage of this war going. So join the army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are our newest commissioned officers, and our army member of the week is Adrian Garrigue. To see more about civilian life in Europe during the war, check out Anna's series On the Home Front. Here is the playlist. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.